Hello and welcome to the first ever Mobile DevOps Summit powered by Bitrise. My name is Victor Benay and I'm the CTO and Bitrise Insights Product Manager here at Bitrise. As part of my job as a CTO, I had many discussions throughout the years about how to prioritize improvement work. If you think about it, the most efficient way is to start with the improvement which gives you the most benefit. But how do you compare seemingly completely unrelated improvement projects and their benefits? And then how do you measure the impact of those technical improvements? This is what we set out to research and solve with the Bitrise Insights team to give you the data and visibility you need to decide which area to improve in your app development process. We started with tracking and reporting mobile app build, test, and credit data to help teams release their mobile apps faster and more frequently. With Bitrise Insights, we are working towards monitoring your whole app development process so you can have an overview of all the key steps, guiding you to find the most impactful bottlenecks and improvement opportunities. I'm very happy to be sharing our virtual stage today alongside panel speakers Stefan Kopin from Compass and Matt Robinson from Reddit, who are both experts in their fields. For the next 45 minutes, we'll be talking about mobile app delivery, how to accelerate and excel using data, and we'll be putting everything out on the table. We'll talk about the biggest challenges, horror stories, successes, and how mobile app delivery with data insights can drive value to users. Let me do a quick introduction on Stefan and on Matt, and then later each of you can talk more about the work you do and the organizations you represent. So first off, we have Stefan, who is a senior software user experience engineer at Compass. Compass is an American real estate technology company providing software to real estate agents and was the first company to have built a proprietary mobile app for real estate agents. Through their industry-leading platform, they are changing how agents and clients navigate the process of finding or selling a home. Matt Robinson is an iOS build engineer at Reddit. Reddit is one of the world's largest social news, content rating, and discussion websites, where every day millions of people around the world post, vote, and comment in communities organized around their interests. As of June 2022, Reddit ranked as the 8th most visited site in the world and 7th most visited in the United States, with over 50 million daily active users, mostly from mobile devices. Thank you guys for joining today. Stefan, would you like to share a bit more about yourself?
Sure thing. So yeah, like you mentioned, I'm a software engineer at Compass. So I have over 10 years of experience in mobile. So my work includes doing app delivery and continuous integration, like for my team, and also making sure that our stack is always as the best for the team and making technical decisions that will impact the team in the best way possible.
Yeah, you definitely saw quite a few interesting things, I guess, related to CI and all the automation around it. And Matt, would you mind sharing some details about yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Matt Robinson. I am an iOS build engineer, technically, on what Reddit calls the iOS apps platform team. The broader team that I'm on focuses on sort of the same stuff as Stefan mentioned, foundational technologies that enable both, product teams or non-product teams within the mobile organization to work better, work faster, work happier, sort of, everything around shipping better, more performant code in a way that's easier. Me personally, though, I'm primarily focused on sort of like the CI and local build portion of that whole experience. And sort of more broadly, generally, I work on sort of the internal and open source Bazel infrastructure that we rely on to do everything from build our app, test our app, and deploy our application, our iOS application to the App Store. So that's my primary focus. But yep, that's about it for me.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you, Matt, and welcome, guys. I think we are ready to dig into our discussion topics. And the first question goes to Stefan. How important is data to you in your day-to-day tasks and decision-making?
So data is actually very important to us. Like we have a saying that goes, you can improve what you can't measure. Data will like guide us whether a feature is successful, whether like stuff that we're currently working on are successful, or like whether something was fixed in the right way. So usually before we make a decision to like for a change in the app, we'll try and look at the existing data to determine whether that'll go in the right direction or not. And then as the app is released and the feature is released, we will like evaluate whether that was the right call. So for example, in the past few months, we've made a lot of optimizations in terms of the app build time. So we were looking at the data that existed and made like small incremental changes in the code and also the project system so that the build time would improve. And we managed to go from like about 16 to 12 minutes overall. And we're still to this day making progress on that front.
That's awesome. And I guess you also use data to measure the impact of internal improvement projects as well.
Yes, we have data for both external and internal changes. We'll try to make both our users, but also our developers, get them the best experience possible.
We'll go into that a bit more detail in the following questions, but next, a question for you, Matt. Was there a situation where you wished you would have data, but you didn't?
I think anybody who's been in this sort of world for a while will have a very obvious answer to that question. And it's probably always yes, right? Like you're always going to have some stuff. I think when I think about this particular question, one facet of it that I think comes up pretty frequently is like not even a situation that's particularly difficult to instrument so much. A lot of times the instrumentation part, or if you already have this infrastructure within your systems, a lot of times it's just stuff that hasn't been instrumented is what you want to sort of what you either it has become a problem or it's going to become a problem soon and you want to sort of get ahead of that. So one particular sort of situation that comes to mind for me is it's very useful for us in terms of giving really quick feedback to our engineers when they make changes, such that sort of relates their code change to downstream warnings or systems that will eventually have a problem, but do that before they merge the code, obviously, right? Like that's the part of it I think that so oftentimes for us is like we just want to shift that forward as fast as we shift it forward as early as we can in the process, such that our team or the team that owns whatever piece of infrastructure that isn't having to bisect and find what caused this problem, whatever it is. And I think one particular example that comes up for our team recently is over the last year we've done a lot of work to keep our application as small as possible. And that's been a focus of many mobile applications over time. Like it's not a particularly new idea, but the way that you instrument that and the way you use your systems to sort of communicate that to people is only good if it exists, right? Whereas a lot of times what happens is you deploy your application and then you look at that in some downstream infrastructure like App Store Connect or the Play Store, whatever you're sort of using in the particular context. And so it's one of those that I think was easy for us to instrument, but has paid a lot of dividends where it's like we can look at a pull request, see that, okay, this is the impact it's going to have on app size. And we can decide very quickly and easily that like, okay, this is or isn't, something that we should investigate or block.
So Stefan, the next one is for you. Related to your app development and delivery process, what do you measure?
We try and measure everything that we can, and we're probably missing a few for sure. So amongst those, like Matt mentioned, would be the app binary size, one of them, but also the compile time, like I mentioned. But overall, also like the CI and the CD build time, making sure that those don't increase or go like too high. We're also measuring So for Bitrise specifically, like how much credits we have and we use for builds, and making sure that those don't grow out of control. Another thing is also for, we do quite a bit of like automated testing, both unit and UI testing. So we also have a measurement for stability on those tests. So UI tests can be flaky. I think everyone can agree on that. And so we try and make them as like the least flaky as possible. So this goes with the stability metric and trying to make sure that all of them run and are up to date all the time.
Thank you. So the next one, Matt, for you, how important are automated tests for your app delivery process? And what do you measure around your tests? Do you track code coverage, test failure rate, flaky tests, and anything else?
Yeah, definitely very similar to Stefan in this case, where, you know, I think like any mobile application at our scale, like it's not if you have automated tests, of course, it's more, you know, what amount and how many and what sort of context do they run in. So, you know, for sure, for us, it is, I would say it's one of the most essential items that we personally have within our team to sort of keep the Reddit application healthy, crash-free, performant, you know, whatever metric you want to sort of pick. We use these sort of tests in the Bitrise environment to validate this stuff for pull requests, for code changes, et cetera. You know, I think the unit tests and the UI tests that we have in that sometimes run on pull requests, sometimes run in different contexts, you know, nightly or what have you. Those are very essential, particularly, you know, the unit tests that we have that validate, you know, the low level functionality of our libraries. Those are sort of treated as tier one, most important. You know, we really try to make sure those are run well and quickly. I think that the stuff that, you know, sort of similar to my comment earlier about app size, that's one of those things, right? That like you would love to have that kind of a test, but that's like, what kind of test is that, right? Like, where does that sort of fit into this sort of weird world of, you know, using the test host that exists within whatever platform you're using? And I think we rely a lot on sort of these, like what I like to call like meta tests, where, you know, they still need to run on the macOS hosts that you're running on for us. They still need to do all this certain stuff, but they do kind of stuff about your system rather than, you know, maybe about the actual code that's executing itself. And so, you know, things like dependency graph analysis to make sure that, you know, when we expand or decrease our dependency graph size by adding a dependency, we don't just, you know, make our extension binary, for example, huge on accident without sort of realizing the complicated web that we're interacting with. So we have a lot of stuff like that around the build graph, the application size, image duplication, et cetera, you know, all these things that are sort of input metrics to the things we actually care about, right? Which are, you know, app size and performance of the application in the build environment. But, you know, sort of trying to get at like, can we really tell people what is going on with their code changes in a way that allows them to sort of walk back and say like, okay, well, I understand, you know, why this isn't going to be allowed or why this is bad. And I think for us, it's particularly useful to have these different set, because for every code change, we'll run somewhere between 1 to 15 Bitrise builds. So, you know, it's a very complicated web that we map around all these builds, downstream builds, et cetera. And so having a good system to manage that is all, you know, super helpful for us. And then I think sort of to the latter part of your question, like, what do we actually measure? You know, of course, we measure all the simple sort of performance-y stuff from the test world or the test flakiness stuff as well. A lot of it using Bitrise Insights, a lot of it using, you know, stuff we have internally to sort of marry those two together. But I think one of the things that's become very important to us over the last couple of years is code coverage in particular. And I think we take a pretty hard stance for code coverage in our environment, where, you know, every pull request has to meet a certain threshold for the code that you're actually touching. And we even have a pretty granular way to describe, like, you know, this particular subsection of the code base is very important, so it needs to have a higher threshold of coverage, and it has to have it, and it can't be merged without it. So we have a very large degree of, you know, I guess, levers that we can utilize or teams themselves can utilize, sort of the organization as a whole, to, really ensure that when other people come in and touch the stuff that, you write or you consider essential, that they're doing, they're not doing you a disservice by coming in there and touching it, and that the whole application stays super stable. And I guess kind of like my last point, which I guess sort of builds on what Stefan said a moment ago too, is like, UI tests might be known to be flaky, but, of course, unit tests are flaky too in some context. And I think for us, it's sort of like maybe quarterly where it comes up, where it's like, we sort of battle down the flakiness, and it stays at a healthy spot, and then it sort of creeps back up, and we sort of have to do a little bit of work again to sort of, cultivate that healthy test garden, if you will. And so for us, I think just having like actionable data that we can either automate and or query and or just really understand, like, let's look at timescales per test target or per test suite that we're running, and really understand, like, what is the health of this in sort of all of the contexts that we run it, whether it be pull requests or otherwise. When you have code coverage requirements, that data around that flakiness is super, super important, because it can heavily degrade, the user experience of working within the code base if as you add more tests, it becomes more flaky, and builds and builds and builds such that you can't even get code coverage because your CI won't pass, or it won't pass locally. So all that stuff is super important to us. I think all with, and I think this is probably obvious, but all with the goal of like maintain trust in the systems we have, that they won't let you do something bad, but you also don't feel like they're in the way. Sort of that balance between those two is like what we try to maintain and validate and ensure with the data we record across the whole pipeline of our like delivery process.
As a minor follow-up question, I was just thinking, let's pick app size and code coverage. Do you have like hard limits for those on pull requests where you actually fail or you don't let through a pull request unless the pull request meets, I don't know, for app size, for example, if it does not increase the app size with a certain delta, I would guess, or how do you do this? Is that just an information on it, and then someone decides whether that's still okay, or there's like a hard limit that no, this is not okay, not acceptable?
And that's a good question. I think right now, for us, like, into the weeds, like for us right now, app size is mostly informational, but it's informational and good in the sense that my team tends to review a lot of stuff. And if we review it and it seems suspicious, we will either wait to make sure that it is or isn't below or above. So that one's more informational, and mostly so that it's easy to get in retrospect, where it's like, okay, we noticed that the binary is up a lot. It's easier to find when we have that information per pull request. But on code coverage, we have very, very explicit thresholds that must be met, or you have to sort of go around the normal code review process and, basically get an exception for you breaking the code coverage rules. And for us, sort of the default is 50% coverage for the changes you have in code that's compiled into the application. And then for a lot of our what we consider sort of like the more important or the areas of code that we have better test coverage on, or are written, let's say, better for including tests, those tend to be at like the 80% coverage of your diff that you're creating, as a blocker for effectively passing those code coverage requirements.
Makes sense. Stefan, what things do you monitor to ensure that you know what's happening with your app after it's released? And overall, what do you measure to see how your app performs in the open?
Like related to like the dev related metrics, we try and measure like a bunch of stuff when the app is released. So these include the app boot time, the app crash rate, but also all kind of error rates. So like API service, for example, when it fails, we try and get some data on it. But also all the users related metrics, so like whether that's like engagement, like session time, or like analytics too, whether when we launch a feature, see what the usage is going to be, what it is, whether it's successful. So all of those drive and allow us to monitor what's happening. We try and do all of those to make sure that when we release a new version of the app, that the app is stable. Also, that there's no errors, ongoing errors, like in the app. So for example, if there's an outage somewhere, we need to make sure that we are aware of it and be able to fix it as soon as possible. It's also very important, like I mentioned, to measure what the user are doing in the app, so that when we launch something new, we can see the usage of what's new, but also what is already there, and go from there. Worth noting, we use also, when we release a new version of the app, we use the phase release that Apple provides. So it allows us pretty much to see for a very small subset of users whether the new version is all right to release to all users. It's been really helpful in the past because we could identify some things that we could fix in a subsequent version and then stop the phase release right away. And yeah, those are really helpful.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, that when you detect that something is off in production, like you are in this release process, what do you do? Well, I guess that's the answer, like you stop the phase release.
Yeah, we usually stop the phase release and then try to have it fixed in as soon as possible. Obviously, we're limited because of iOS. On our side, we're limited by the review time, but thanks to expedited reviews, we can usually get a fix pretty quickly when it's in the app. When it's related to the backend, for example, it's fixed. It can be fixed pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, that's a bit easier usually.
Yeah.
Or quicker at least to do a rollback. Next one is for you, Matt. How do your teams understand or find it hard to understand where their critical bottlenecks are?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think, if we were all perfect at this, we would all be a lot better engineers and at our job. That being said, I think, for us in particular, like answering with the experience here at Reddit, we tend to have pretty good data instrumentation across, our local and CI processes and, like what Stefan just talked about, like sort of in his world for, like the metrics you track once you're in a production environment. I would say we have good data around that stuff. And I think, for us, a lot of that's like acute problems, right? Like that's sort of less of like a, let's say we have a critical bottleneck and we need to incorporate that into our planning process to sort of, fix it over a quarter, because it is a really critical system, but it's also very complex. I think focus sort of more on the acute side, where it's like, a release or a code change or something like that has done some impact. In that particular case, I think we have a pretty good set of, alerting and, ownership attribution and things like that, sort of all associated with, the world of data we employ, or the set of experiments a given set of code is running, and associating that, with whatever high level metrics we consider important for, that particular thing or at that particular time in the company. So I think we do a pretty good job of that. But I think, we can always, there's always improvements to be made for sure. I think one of the things that not necessarily that we find difficult to understand in relation to this stuff, but is more like how do I say, like it's like the organizational side of all this stuff, where it tends to be, like, even if you have the data, you have to make either the teams or the alerts or the data like work in a way that like gives the accountability to sort of, fix whatever bottleneck either was introduced or sort of you're targeting. And so I think for that, we've been building that functionality out a lot more, where, a distribution across a growing team of people all working within one iOS code base or within one mobile code base to really share the burden of like, everybody owns performance, everybody owns crash stability, et cetera, et cetera. Let's take all the data we have and actually understand what's going on and what has impacted those things in relation to those sort of what I keep calling acute metrics. But I think when I sort of hear your question, particularly if I think about like my day to day, like what is one of the things that I find difficult or useful for us to use as like a determination of critical bottlenecks. And that's like, when I think about our CI environment, like what I was saying earlier, is like we have 15-ish or more builds that run per commit on a pull request. Those run in 2 different CI systems. There's 3 different levels of the way those build in a pipeline. Like it is a, it is complex enough that unless you're in that like environment day to day, do you know what is necessarily happening? No. And like, you shouldn't necessarily have to, right? But I think for us in that particular realm, what has been really helpful is basically each of those individual, let's say, I'll say builds, but that's obviously more nuanced than that. But like, let's say each of those builds, instrumenting that and understanding those times, that's great. And that's like really helpful to say like, okay, we know this one is slow, let's focus on it and we know what we can do. But I think at the highest level, like what we want to get closer and closer to is really like what, because like at the end of the day, what you're trying to represent in this world is how long does an engineer have to wait? Or how long does an engineer push up some code and then they hit the merge button and it's in, right? Like that is ultimately what you care about. Everything that happens between is just an implementation detail of like what's going on within your system, which you need data about that. But at the end of the day, if you instrument that broader range, that allows, I think, us to, have a very clean reporting process in terms of we can represent what is the impact of our systems on, our customers, the internal engineers at Reddit. While also, having that number makes us much more confident that like, okay, we have that number, we have the input numbers to that broader number. Now we can sort of say, okay, if that broader number is fine, we're probably good. But, as it ticks upward or it changes dramatically, okay, now it's time to go dig into the data specifically to find, like a literal bottleneck in that process to actually go fix. So yeah, I think, it's like all these systems are in that particular process. It's like it's a complex system with a bunch of computers, a bunch of people, a bunch of all this stuff involved. And so it's like one of those things where there's so many different levers to pull that I think establishing a truthful number that represents that at least allows you to understand, okay, maybe I don't know why code reviews are taking a long time or why it takes a long time, but at least I know how long it takes, right? And then you can at least dig into the data and really, really go deeper to understand, okay, what can I do to sort of impact that? So I think that for us has been a very important investment as, the system and the amount of engineers in the system, all of that stuff grows. We need to sort of have a more concrete relationship to that, because you can't just monitor like all of the small little independent things that are happening because there's just too many.
Yeah. And I absolutely love what you said, that it's ultimately about how much time engineers, developers have to wait for pull requests, because it definitely can be that something is slowing down a bit. But if at the end of the day, that's not, making the pull request or the automated test part of the pull request at least longer, then that's probably not where you should focus your time.
And I think one of the things that I and my team sort of push for is that, even if you have that number, like what is the correct number that you're striving for, right? Like that's, who knows? Like, I mean, of course you can pick something, but I think in this process, it's like internal customer sentiment around that number is really what's important. Like if the sentiment thinks that it's slow, well, maybe it is and we should make it faster. But if like, and I hate to sort of like preach, I guess, like the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of idea for fixing problems. But like at the end of the day, it's like you just want people to be happy and feel productive and be productive. And so sort of whatever, however you can do to get from how people feel to and map that to a number and improvements, I think is like, that's super important for us. And we tend to do that with surveys and like understanding sentiment, but it's like the mapping of that to the actual effect on like the people.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask, whether you have survey on that, and if you have like a threshold number, how long ideally, like what's the maximum that they should wait for a pull request related builds automations?
I mean, yes, we have goals. Yes, we have numbers that are those goals, but I think that's just because we see that we can do those improvements, and we know that there's inefficiencies in the system that we can improve, unless like we have some hard cutoff of like, this is where we either need to be or can't be above. We don't really have a super specific number there, but I think ultimately everybody wants what does everybody want? Everybody wants their pull request to give them the information in 10 minutes, I think is what I always hear. Is that possible? Probably. Are we there right now? We're close. We're not there yet, but
getting there.
That's what people want. It's like they don't want to wait hours. Is it right? That's the high level.
Yeah, 10 minutes is like a good coffee break, which is perfect. But then you can continue what you were doing. Thank you. And there's one last topic which would go for both of you. It's more like what do you wish kind of question. So if you could ask for one more data point, what would that be? I guess first, Stefan, if you want to share your wish with us.
I guess for us, one of the things that it's really hard to measure is like developer satisfaction, like how happy are the people on our team happy with actually what we built in terms of CI/CD, but also our stack in general. It's really hard to gauge, because people, from my experience, will like learn to work around it if it actually goes against what they want to do. So it's like it doesn't actually get back to us on the team for us trying to improve. We actually have to actively search for the feedback and try to extract it from the people, and from there try to do our best to actually improve the process. But it's really active process, and if there was a way passively that people could proactively get to us so that we know what works and what doesn't, I think that would really be ideal in our world.
Yeah, that might be a good idea for a new startup or something.
Yeah.
Matt, how about you? What's your wish?
Maybe this is probably very similar to what Stefan just said, to be honest. I think, and I guess similar to what I said earlier too, I think for me and what I've seen across like a handful of companies is, and ultimately, I guess it's like it's like the input to, how people feel, like that input. And for me, it's like what I always call like less time to merge and more like a broader view of like, can we represent the waiting time per engineer per day? And, it's like they wait for a checkout, they wait for some script to create an Xcode project, they wait for the build, they wait for the CI system, they wait for reviews, like encapsulate all of that like extremely complex system, which is why I don't think it's done very many places, and because it's just hard to, it's hard to instrument in a way that's real. But really distill down to, what is blocking people from doing work, and where are there inefficiencies in the system, and what is that overall inefficiency, and how much, because really it just illustrates how much room there is to improve things in terms of time where people aren't actively, coding or working or feeling like they're sort of making progress. But sometimes it is nice to go get coffee while you wait for a build. So maybe it's actually not that bad. It's one of those things that's hard to know, but I would love to have that number.
Yeah, there's definitely a balance there, like the just right enough wait time so that you can get your coffee, but it's not too long that you have to switch to something else.
Yep.
All right, and thank you. It's really not every day that someone can see a bit behind the curtains of Reddit and Compass. So a huge thank you to both of you. And I think we should switch to answering questions from the audience.